some old faces, some new faces. Stephen, do we have anybody for public comment at this time?
We didn't have anyone who signed up prior to the meeting. If there's anyone in the attendees that is interested in providing a comment, you can use the raise hand feature now. I'm not seeing anyone raising their hand, so I think we can move on.
All right. So with that, Stephen, can you call the roll?
Do that. All right, we'll go in alphabetical order. I noticed we had some alternates, so I'll try to catch those, but if not, let me know along the way. So for Banks, Mayor Jones.
Here.
Thank you. For Beaverton, Mayor Beatty. Thank you. City of Cornelius, Mayor Delane.
Present.
Thank you. Durham, I don't know if we have a representative, Mayor Jenke. All right, keep an eye out. For City of Forest Grove, do we have Mayor Wenzel? Haven't seen her yet, so we'll keep an eye out. Let's see, Hillsborough, we had Councilor Van Beveren, you're sitting in today.
Yes.
Okay,
Sure.
thank you. For King City, we don't have a member or an alternate available. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But I did want to note that City Manager Mike Weston is listening in on the call. And if there were any specific questions, maybe that he might be able to help address, we can promote him up. For North Plains, Mayor Linehan.
Present.
Thank you. City of Sherwood. So I saw Keith. I think actually we have Mayor Rosner and then Council President Young as the
Young is not
an alternate.
She's not the official alternate yet. I'm still the old alternate. We're changing our official alternate.
Oh, okay.
So
Maybe we had a miscommunication. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. Okay. For City of Tigard, Mayor Lube.
Here.
Thank you. For Tualatin, Mayor Bubenik.
Present.
Thank you. For City of Wilsonville, we have Mayor Fitzgerald with us today.
Present.
And for Washington County, Commissioner Fye.
Present, Stephen.
Thank you. And we have our Metro Council rep, Rosenthal, Councilor Rosenthal. Or Councilor Gonzalez, we'll keep an eye out for them. From ODOT, Stephanie Turner.
Yep, here.
Thank you, Stephanie. I don't think we have a port rep. And for TriMet, I saw John Sarah. Thank you, John. Okay, have I missed anyone? Okay, great. Thank you.
All right.
Sure.
So that moves us to item 2B. The JPAC trip will be happening May 13th through 16th. So Metro's changed the date of the May JPAC meeting to May 22nd. So suggestion was made to move our meeting to May 20th. Is that a problem for anyone to move our meeting to May 20th? Any conflicts? Pretty quiet. All right, so let's pencil in May 20th, Stephen, for our meeting in May.
Good, we will do that.
All right. That brings us to item number 3, action item 3A. As we all know, Mayor Fender, along with 3 other city councilors from King City, were recalled in the last few weeks. She was operating as my vice chair. So she's no longer has the ability to serve as vice chair. So we need to fill that position. And speaking with Mayor Callaway over the weekend, traditionally, and I think by bylaw, what has been done is that I hand over the election of the new vice chair over to the biggest city in Washington County, who is being represented by Councilor Rick Van Buren today. So he will run the vote and the nominations. And ideally, we'll have a new vice chair. Just a reminder, the vice chair will serve as my vice chair for the rest of this calendar year, and then will become the chair of the committee next year for the next 2 years. So keep that in mind if you're thinking about throwing your hat in, you're looking at the remainder of this year, an additional 2 years beyond that as the chair. So with that, I'll turn this over to Councilor Van Beveren.
Thank you, Mayor Bubinek. And I understand we need to elect a new WCCC Vice Chair. Do I have a nomination for the Vice Chair position?
So you came off mute, Keith.
This Keith Mays with Sherwood. I'd like to I'd like to nominate Mayor Lenahan from North Plains, if she would accept the nomination.
Great. Are there other nominations to consider? If not, I will consider the nominations process closed. And I would ask for a motion to approve Mayor Lenahan for Vice Chair of the WCCC.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. I don't know if we need a roll call vote or if it's by voice.
Can I say that I will accept that nomination?
No,
We're gonna ask.
Thank you for
Wait a minute.
accepting.
Excellent. That's a very good comment there, Terry. Perfect timing.
Okay, now that we've trapped her into the position, do we need a roll call or can this be done by voice vote?
Or do you prefer, Stephen?
I think we can just do a voice vote, but it may actually be helpful since we are on Zoom, if folks would mind raising your hand for an affirmative vote. That might just help ensure that we get an accurate count.
Have they called for the vote?
Okay, it looks like, at least everyone I can see, it looks unanimous.
Great, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor, and congratulations, Mayor Lenahan.
Thank you for serving.
Here, here.
All right. That brings us to consideration of the Washington County Coordinating Committee meeting minutes of February 12th, 2024. Everyone have a chance to look at them and see any things that need to be updated. If not, do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the Washington County Coordinating Committee meeting summary for February 12th of 2024. All those in favor say aye or raise your hand.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed? Any abstentions? Looks like it's unanimous, Stephen. Item Transportation Development Tax Expenditure Request. So we have I think it's Niami's doing this. Diami, I'm sorry.
Yep, we're promoting him up right now.
Afternoon. I think I made the transition successfully. Diami Valentine, Principal Transportation Planner. Washington County requests approval for a TDT project expenditure of 1.7 million for the Stafford Road, 65th Avenue, Elligsen Road intersection project. County staff did review and confirm that it is eligible, and the WCCC TAC recommended approval at their February 29th meeting, and we do have staff available if any questions arise. Otherwise, we would request approval of and WCCC consideration of approval.
Questions for Diami? Not seeing any hands up. Do we have a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Welcome, Mayor Wenzel. I thought I heard Keith. Was that Keith?
Yeah. Sorry.
Do I have a motion from Keith?
Yeah.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, so I have a motion and second to approve the TDT expenditure request. Those in favor of the motions, please raise your hand to say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Looks like it's unanimous. Thank you. That brings us to 3D, the MSTIP 3F funding allocation recommendation from staff. Stephen, ball's in your court. You're muted, Stephen.
Oop, okay, didn't click hard enough. So I'm actually gonna have Jessica Pels walk us through the presentation,
good.
and then Jessica and I will be available to answer any questions. So we do want to just give you an overview of the potential funding allocation request, and then again, we'll both be available to answer questions afterward. Go ahead, Jessica.
Okay, hopefully that's sharing. So like Stephen said, we're just going to give an overview. I know everyone here knows all about MSTIP, but as we've done a lot of talking and discussing over the past few months, we'll give a little refresh of all the projects that were proposed and then our recommendation. So our presentation today will go over the previously discussed 3D and 3E project funding gap. And we know we talked about the gap that we had and the solutions we were exploring with the board, and we never really come back and circled back with a resolution. So we have some news on that. We'll go through the 3F prioritization process review, and then our recommendation, and then the next steps. So back in November, we brought some information to the WCCC about the $90 million funding gap we are seeing in our previously allocated MSTIP 3D and 3E projects. This was due to a lot of factors, including unprecedented. Okay, hold on 1 second. Okay. So I'm sure many of you are seeing the same factors contributing to the capital project costs that you're having in your cities. They were project design decisions, scope changes, unforeseen project costs, just an incredible escalation that we saw with inflation. And then in addition to the $90 million funding gap, we had a long planned second bond sale for $60 million to complete construction of our previously allocated MSTIP bonding cost sharing programs. So back in January, we got direction from the Board of County Commissioners to issue up to $150 million in bonds to fund completion of these previously approved projects. So that is the resolution of that. So sort of the past, and now we're moving to the forward-looking MSTIP 3F. But before we do that, I'm going to stop sharing and then reshare, because it looks like I'm sharing my whole desktop in case I get emails that come through. That's always distracting. So let me stop that, and then I'll share again the right way here. Okay, I think that's right now. So a summary of the MSTIP 3F prioritization process that we went through. Back in 2022, in the spring, the cities and the county submitted 33 project candidates for consideration. Those project candidates went through a pretty extensive evaluation process by county staff, the WCCC TAC, and community-based organization leadership that we had a workshop with to narrow the list down, which the WCCC recommended moving forward with, and then the board confirmed a list of 25 projects to move forward for community engagement. We did that community engagement in the summer of 2022. You probably remember seeing us at your farmers markets and other events around the county. We attended 15 different in-person events, and we also did an online open house. Overall, between paper surveys from the in-person events and the online open house survey, we received I think 975 survey responses. So we got a really robust response. We were really happy with it. Then we kind of paused, but we went through some internal budgeting things, and now we're back with the prioritization. So for that, we went back to the WCCC and WCCC TAC at the December 3rd workshop. We asked for additional input on project preferences, and we got a lot of responses from that helped us narrow down our staff recommendation. So just a reminder of the roles in this process. We have the WCCC TAC, which proposes and evaluates MSTIP projects that are under consideration. We conduct community engagement. They explore funding options. They give us guidance at the staff level. And then they make a recommendation to you, the WCCC. Your role in this is reviewing the projects as well and providing a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners on project selection. And in addition, the WCCC has a role in reviewing and approving MSTIP Opportunity Fund allocations. And then the Board of County Commissioners, of course, has to consider the holistic view of all county services that need to be delivered through general fund, including transportation. And they make the final decisions on budget and policy and approve the MSTIP funding allocation. So this map is showing a recap of all, these are the 25 projects that move forward for community engagement. You can see they are, if I can move this, there. They are sort of spread throughout the county. We have projects from North Plains through Forest Grove, and then Hillsborough, unincorporated, and basically all the cities. Most of the cities, I guess King City doesn't have one this round proposed. And then I'm going to go through each of the projects that were proposed by district. And I think the big takeaway here is that we have a lot of need in the county for transportation improvements. These are all great projects. They all would have been worthy of funding. We just had to prioritize down for what funding we had available or we're projecting to have available. So for District 1, we had Alexander Street, complete street improvements proposed for final design and construction. 185th Avenue proposed for preliminary design, 205th Avenue Bridge for final design and construction or match. And we'll talk a little bit more about match later. Farmington Road proposed for match, Allen Boulevard for preliminary design, and Beaverton Downtown Loop Phase 1, which is Watson Avenue, for preliminary design, final design and construction or match. In District 2, we had Saltzman Road for final design and construction, Beaverton Hillsdale Highway Olson Road, Shoals Ferry Road intersection for match, Southwest Walker Road Segment A and Segment C for final design and construction for both of them, 185th Avenue Max Light Rail Overcrossing Project for match, Northeast Walker Road out in Hillsborough area for preliminary design, final design and construction, and 170th Avenue for final design and construction. And I should note that 170th is starred here because it changed districts over the time period that we were reviewing MSTIP 3F due to the Commissioner District boundary redistricting. In District 3, we had the Salt Creek Parkway extension for match, Edie Road for preliminary design, final design and construction, Greenberg Road for preliminary design, final design and construction, Herman Road, Cypole Road intersection, and Herman Road complete streets for preliminary design, final design and construction, Tualatin Sherwood Road, Boones Ferry Road intersection. They're in the middle of Tualatin for preliminary design, final design and construction, and Boones Ferry Road for preliminary design only. And that's between Tualatin and Wilsonville down to the interchange. And then in District 4, Wren Road, Cessbar Road intersection for preliminary design, final design and construction. Oregon 47 at Southwest Fernhill Road, Maple Street there in Forest Grove for final design and construction. Glencoe Road, West Union Road roundabout in North Plains for preliminary design, final design and construction.
I got your text and was input for the weekend.
North 19th Avenue in Cornelius for preliminary design, final design and construction. And South 29th Boulevard Phase 3, that's also in Cornelius for preliminary design, final design and construction. And Cornell Road, Brookwood Parkway intersection for preliminary design, final design and construction. Now to our recommendation. So this table in green shows the MSTIP 3F recommended allocation for capital projects, opportunity fund, a new allocation idea for large project match, rural bridges, and intelligent transportation systems. The gray boxes or columns to the right show what was allocated in previous cycles for MSTIP 3D and 3E. This is just for comparison and understanding. The total project package that we're recommending is a $250 million package. It's a little bit more in capital projects than previous cycles. However, from what we've seen with the cost escalation for projects, this is pretty much in line with what we could accomplish in those previous cycles, or maybe even less, to be honest. We're including a little bit more for Opportunity Fund. That's a hugely successful program that leverages a lot of external funding. And then the large project match allocation, I'll talk about that in another slide in a minute. And then a pretty consistent allocation for rural bridges and a little bit more for ITS. We're seeing a lot of need for those programs, and that's also a program that leverages a lot of outside funding. So first, I'll go through the list of capital projects recommended for funding with MSTIP 3F. For District 1, that is Alexander Street, to the 205th Avenue Bridge at Beaverton Creek, and Beaverton Downtown Loop Phase 1, Watson Avenue. For District 2, it's both Walker Road Segment A and Segment C, and it also adds in the Walker Road intersection improvements to make a whole long complete segment there. For District 3, we have the Edie Road improvements requested by Sherwood, and we're also proposing to add a little bit for Edie Road, Elbert Road study so that that whole corridor can be planned for. And then Greenberg Road and Tigard and Herman Road, including Herman Road, Cycle Road intersection in Tualatin. And then in District 4, the Highway 47 at Southwest Fernhill Road, Maple Street intersection, improvements in Forest Grove. Glencoe Road, West Union Road, intersection improvements in North Plains. North 19th Avenue improvements in Cornelius. Cornell Road, Brookwood Parkway intersection there in Hillsborough, and Red Road, Susquehanna Road intersection out in rural District 4. So you can see on the column to the right, this is approximately $50 million per commissioner district. So this map is the same one from previous, shows the district boundaries, and the highlighted are the projects recommended for capital project funding through the 3F allocation. Now I talk through the programs a little bit. For Opportunity Fund, we're recommending a $13 million allocation. MSTIP has included a set aside for bike and ped improvements since 1990, and then it was renamed Opportunity Fund in 2012. And it is really used specifically to leverage outside fund. It's meant as a competitive grant match program. And since 2012, the Opportunity Fund has leveraged almost $63 million in external funding, using $12.5 million in MSTIP funds. So it's hugely successful. It has a 55% grant funding success rate with 38 funded projects. Now let's talk about the large project match. This we think is going to be a really great opportunity. Several projects were submitted for match funding through MSTIP 3F, and the reason they were submitted that way instead of through Opportunity Fund is because the match requirement is so high that it's hard to fund any other way. So these are, for example, $10 and $20 million matches that were being requested. So this bucket can provide a central match fund for these large federal or state grant funding opportunities that are going to require these significant project matches of 20% or more. And the way the bucket would work is any of these projects that were proposed for match funding would be eligible, including 170th, 185th Avenue Max Light Rail Crossing, the Basalt Creek Parkway Extension, Beaverton Hillsdale Highway, Olson Road, Shoals Ferry Road intersection, and Farmington Road improvements. So rather than setting aside funding specifically for a proposed match for any specific of these projects that may or may not be successful, the idea is to have a bucket that could be leveraged for any of these projects were they to be successful for a federal or state grant. We're anticipating the process for spending the funds would be similar to the MSTIP Opportunity Fund expenditure approval, but we would add a step for the Board of County Commissioners to review and approve. So it would be more like the WCCC TAC would review and make a recommendation. The WCCC would then review and make a recommendation to the board, and then the board would review and make a decision on the spending. For rural bridges, we're proposing $10 million. This is pretty much in line with what they have received in previous allocations. Rural bridge maintenance and replacement of the aging timber structures is a crucial part of our bridge management program. And these bridges are typically not competitive for MSTIP or really other outside funding. Yeah, I mean, the state has some funding for bridges, but we have a significant amount, and this helps keep our program going and improves the overall safety of the countywide transportation system. And then we are proposing $2 million for intelligent transportation systems improvements. We're seeing a lot of progress in these technological improvements. It's really great for pedestrian and bike signals, for emergency, the emergency vehicle signal preemption. I was trying to get all the words in there, and transit signal preemption and things like that. So these sort of things can really help our system move more smoothly. And this graphic is showing our anticipated project sequencing. This question came up at WCCC TAC of when we anticipate projects beginning. So we are currently working on completing 3D, 3E, and bonding cost sharing projects, and we will continue doing that over the next 3 or 4 years, we anticipate. We would anticipate beginning or completing the design of the 3E design only projects. A lot of those are nearing completion and would be still in the pipeline. And then those would likely be delivered first because they are already designed versus the other projects that would have to go into preliminary design and start that whole process. So you can see it's sort of a cyclical thing. We have this project pipeline where we do preliminary design and then we work on final design and right-of-way acquisition and then finally construction. For next steps, on March 7th, the WCCC TAC reviewed this funding allocation proposal. They recommended the WCCC vote to recommend approval of the MSTIP 3F funding allocation as proposed to the Board of County Commissioners. We recommend that you now consider the WCCC TAC recommendation and make a motion and vote to recommend that the Board of County Commissioners approve the proposed MSTIP 3F funding allocation package. The next steps after this meeting, the Board of County Commissioners will hold a work session on April 16th to consider your recommendation. And then in late spring, the board will take action to formally adopt the MSTIP 3F funding allocation. And that concludes my presentation.
All right, thanks, Jessica. Questions for Jessica and or Stephen? Or comments? Mayor Lou.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. They're sort of, I guess, related to each other. I appreciate the project sequencing sort of information, but I'm also wondering, within those, how are you prioritizing delivery of the projects of those that are, I mean, possibly in the similar sort of sequence or similar position? And then right now, I think the contingencies for costs are, and project overruns are at 30%. And we know currently that's not really cutting it for a lot of our cities. And so what is the plan for funding if those projects that aren't implemented at first that are going to be well over 30%? Is there a plan for what those costs might be or how that project will move forward?
Great, thank you, Mayor. So I think to the first question, we haven't gotten into trying to prioritize the specific projects within the funding allocation at this point. Still a little bit premature. We need to, obviously, we want to get through the board approval process, but confirm what our list of projects is. And then I think in the past, what we've done is really tried to just sort of take a look at some of the logistical and feasibility challenges that some projects may have. So trying to start thinking about how to sequence those within the project. We're also trying to somewhat manage to our staffing pipeline, if you will. So making sure that we have enough projects, but not too many in the pipeline at the same time to try to move those through. And so that is a question that we'll need to spend more time on, trying to really develop a more thorough response to the specifics of sequencing. And then on your second point, the sort of contingency idea. So correct, we've factored in a 30% contingency in our cost estimates. We've actually done more this time to try to anticipate cost increases that may occur over time in those cost estimates. And then in addition to that, the 30% contingency baked into those cost estimates. So we're hopeful that we'll see these estimates end up being a little bit truer to the ultimate costs. And in the event that they aren't for some reason, then we also will have procedures by which we go back and evaluate for project overruns. What's the right solution to try to close that funding gap? Do we, as partners potentially in that city and or county, bring some additional funds to the table if that's a possibility? Are there scope changes that can be made? Do we just make a decision to stretch out the funding cycle a little bit further to help ensure that we can complete all of those different projects? So there are some administrative tools in place to try to help mitigate if and when those instances do occur.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. Great questions.
Mayor Wenzel.
Thank you, Chair. I'm curious, in the Rural Bridge Fund, the $10 million, what's the priority, like how do you prioritize projects? And how many of our rural bridges need some additional maintenance?
That is a good question. I will say the list is way longer than we have the funding to address. So we do a number of projects where we're, as a part of our ongoing routine maintenance, we're out doing various bridge maintenance activities, and sometimes those end up being pretty major maintenance activities, sort of replacing major timber components. So that's usually our first course of action with a lot of these. Sometimes that just isn't an option any longer. And one of the specific challenges that this program has been really helpful to address is when we have bridges that are on what we call resource routes in the rural area. So these may be roadways that, while they're local roads, they provide access to a quarry or to some other significant timber resource. And so while the classification of the roadway itself doesn't necessarily make it a major roadway, the use of it specifically is really important. And specifically on the resource routes, given the increases in the loading of some of the gravel trucks, the single unit, I forget what they're called, but they're those really ginormous dump trucks. The loading of those trucks is extremely intense. And so we have a number of bridges on some of those resource routes that are substandard and really do need to be addressed. And in terms of prioritization, so we do have a list that the county manages, and as we review those bridges, ODOT also does a periodic review of bridge structures and lets us know if they have specific concerns about a particular bridge. So that is a little bit of an evolving priority list. And so as we have opportunity and capacity within the program, kind of both from the funding and the staffing point, then we evaluate and determine what the next priority project should be.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? I'm not seeing any other hands up. Am I missing anybody? Okay, do we need any further discussion? Because we do need to have a vote on our recommendation on the staff's recommendation. So we can get this to the Board of Commissioners for next month. So do I have a motion or any further discussion on whether or not we agree with the staff's recommendation to pass this on to the county commissioners for them to review and approve also?
So moved.
I think I heard Keith move.
Yeah.
I'll second that.
Okay, Mayor Wenzel, all right. I have a motion and a second to approve the staff's recommendation for the MSTIP funding for 3F. Any further discussions on these motions? I'm not seeing any hands up. All those in favor say aye and hold up your hand so we can see.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Not seeing anybody abstaining. Not seeing any abstentions. So it looks like it's unanimous in approval to forward on to the county commissioners, please, Stephen.
Great. Thank you all.
And thank you, Jessica, for all your work on this.
Well, thank you guys. It's been a long journey.
That's for sure. All right. That brings us up to section 4 of our agenda today, information and discussion. First item is the 2027-2030 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program, otherwise known as MTIP, and the 2028-2030 Regional Flexible Funds Allocation, RFFA, work programs and process. We'll be hearing from Grace Cho and Ted Leibold today from Metro to let us know what's going on. Keep in mind that JPAC will have to weigh in on this 2 times in the next couple of years, this summer and next summer. And we're looking to see, we're looking for as much flexibility for Washington County as possible in these programs over the next 2 years. Take it away, Metro.
Great. Thank you, members of the Washington County Coordinating Committee, for inviting me and Ted to present an overview and on the process and schedule for developing the 2028 through 2030 Regional Flexible Fund Allocation and the program direction. So that's what I'll specifically focus on today. And I apologize, I think I misunderstood that and a request for a little more information about the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program. I'm hoping I can check in with Washington County staff about maybe coming back with that in the future. But today I'll really be focusing specifically on the 28 through 30 Regional Flexible Fund Allocation. My name is Grace Cho. I'm a senior transportation planner, and I'll be leading the development of the Regional Flexible Fund Allocation. Next slide. So just briefly to start, the Regional Flexible Funds are, next slide, please. They are federal transportation dollars in which the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which for this region is Metro, has the authority to allocate. They're comprised solely of federal surface transportation funding, primarily 2 sources, the Surface Transportation Block Grant and the Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Program. In total, they make up about 5% of all the transportation funding in the metropolitan region. And for context and size and scale, the previous allocation of the Regional Flexible Fund, Metro awarded about $152 million. Next slide, please. So we are just getting started or just getting underway with the 2028 through 2030 Regional Flexible Fund allocation process. The main body of work will be conducted over 3 phases over the next year and a half, which we had kicked off in February, so maybe a little less than a year and a half at this point. Where we start really is the development of the program direction, which we are seeking input throughout the region. And we're hoping to actually have that program direction completed and adopted by JPAC and the Metro Council in late spring or early summer of this year. Following the next step of the process, we go into what we call step 2, which I'll speak to a little bit later in my presentation. But this might be the part of the Regional Flexible Fund allocation process that members are most familiar with. And this is when Metro actually does a solicitation or a call for projects in that sense, where we are seeking applications or consideration for regional flexible funds. We will look to open that application period likely in about September of this year, and with the aim to have proposals due into Metro in November. We'll follow that up with conducting a technical analysis and a risk assessment of all the applications that we receive. And then we move into the third phase of the process, which we then take that information and bring it out for public comment. We'll look to get the county coordinating committees to take the information of the technical analysis, the risk assessment, as well as the public comment to formulate a priority or set of priorities from the applications that are received specifically from their part of the region. And we'll bring all that information forward to then begin the deliberations for the final allocation for the regional flexible funds. And we look to do that starting in spring of 2025 with the aim of completing that by summer of 2025. Next slide, please. So I've noted that the first part of the process is the development of the program direction. Next slide, please. So the Regional Flexible Fund Program Allocation Program Direction documents how the region will expend the regional flexible funds in a manner that advances the goals, priorities, and policy objectives of the most recently adopted Regional Transportation Plan. The program direction sets the objectives for the allocation process. And then lastly, the program direction largely defines the funding categories within the whole allocation program. And in defining those funding categories, it aims to provide about estimated amounts that are set within each of those funding categories. These two funding categories, we at Metro typically talk about them as step 1 and step 2. Next slide, please. So as I noted, they've been traditionally divided up into this step 1 and step 2 process. Step 1 is focused on the region's previous commitments towards project bond repayments, as well as region-wide programs and planning activities that have been identified through regional policy objectives, and that for various implementation efficiencies and administrative reasons have typically been coordinated at Metro. The step 2 process is the competitive grant allocation, which I had noted just earlier. And that grant allocation to capital projects is guided by a number of regional objectives, with the highest priorities being those outlined specifically in the regional transportation plan. So as listed below, the 5 areas that this most recently adopted RTP had adopted are the main focus of this upcoming regional flexible fund allocation, particularly as we move into the step 2 process. Next slide, please. So what we are estimating for the regional flexible fund allocation for this upcoming cycle, which are funds available starting in federal fiscal year 2028 through 2030, is about 153 million. So not too different from what we had allocated from our previous cycle. But not all of that money is available for that capital grant allocation. We do have some previous project bond commitments, repayments that we need to make, and during that time frame, that comprises of about $52 million in terms of bond repayments that we're expected to make. Our region-wide programs and planning at their base level, if we keep them existing at the existing operating levels that they are today, is about 41 million. And so that ultimately leaves a remaining discretionary amount of about $60 million, which if there is not any specific direction to do anything different, would default directly to that step 2 capital grant allocation. Next slide, please. So as I noted, we are really just getting underway with our regional flexible fund allocation process. So the program direction, which is what we're aiming to complete by late spring or early summer of this year. We're right now really in that gathering input phase. So from February, from when we kicked off through essentially through April, we have been going around to our regional tables, but also as by request, coming to coordinating committees and gathering input on the program direction. Following that input, starting in May and June, we're really looking to outline a proposed set of options, are shaping that program direction and essentially shaping what step 1 looks like, as well as shaping what step 2 looks like. And defining those allocations for step 1, as well as defining the criteria for looking at those applications in step 2. And then in June, we'll really be moving into that adoption process of the program direction. Next slide, please. Following the program direction adoption, we then start gearing up and moving into that step 2 capital grant allocation process, where we will gear and look to receive project proposals and conduct the evaluation. As noted, we will run the call for projects in the fall of this year, and we're looking at the September through November timeframe. We're looking at about a 2-month window for developing proposals. We'll also be holding a number of applicant workshops. We'll hold an applicant workshop early in the process during the call for projects. We've also been actually holding some technical trainings as well with each of our TPAC workshop meetings, which are every other month, where we're going through aspects that would be helpful for the application process. So this is a lot about walking through the basics of scoping a project and just getting bringing applicants that may be interested up to speed on like some basic information of what you can expect as part of the applications and what would be helpful information as you're starting to think through project applications and build those applications for the call window. Once we close that call window, we'll then move into the evaluation process. And again, as noted, we'll run through a technical evaluation and also conduct a risk assessment. That risk assessment is really just looking at possible flags around project delivery and really looking at what sort of challenges that project may run into if it gets awarded funding in trying to actually deliver that project through the federal aid process. Next slide, please. Then, following the technical evaluation, Metro will hold a public comment period on all the applications that are submitted for consideration. And following that public comment period, the coordinating committees will be provided the technical evaluation results, the risk assessment results, and the public comment summary as information to help inform a discussion of the sub-region or county coordinating committee priorities. The county coordinating committees are able to provide that information about their region's priorities amongst the applications received to Metro staff and helping to form a recommendation to bring forward for discussion through TPAC and JPAC. And really that timeframe of when we anticipate the county coordinating priorities discussion for those county coordinating priorities to take place would be in about an April-May timeframe of next year. Following that, we'll take all of those pieces of information and really begin the deliberation process going through spring through summer of 2025, where we'll be bringing forward each month at TPAC and JPAC the opportunity for discussions and formulating that recommendation for the allocation, and then finally seeking action from JPAC and council. Next slide, please. So as noted, Metro kicked off this process in February, and we've really been in a input gathering phase. So I wanted to share a little bit about what we've heard to date. Next slide. So since February, we've been on a bit of a roadshow seeking input to help us shape options for the flexible fund program direction. And thus far, in summary, the input we've received in regards to the next regional flexible fund allocation, the big themes that we're hearing are the following. We've been hearing a lot about a strong desire to make a big impact with our regional flexible fund dollars. We heard this through the adoption of the 2023 Regional Transportation Plan, but now that we're actually starting to look at an actual available source of funding, what can we do to make a big impact with these dollars? But we also recognize that $153 million is not a huge amount that's available. So really thinking about how can we be as strategic as possible with using those dollars to be able to set the region up to leverage discretionary funding. As part of that strategic use of funds, some other things that we've heard is that the region may want to consider new regional investments to be making. Nothing specific, but just really kind of opening up that discussion. The other big theme that we heard was a lot about investing in our region's transit system. Everyone recognized transit's role in meeting our region's transportation goals, as well as broader statewide goals as it relates to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But what we didn't hear was necessarily a consistent theme specific to transit. We heard lots of different solutions and investment concepts being suggested. So just a few examples listed on the slide. Next slide, please. We've also heard a lot of process-related questions and gathered a lot of input as it relates to conducting the regional flexible fund allocation process. In particular, we've been hearing a lot around the details of the Step 2 capital grant allocation, and what we've heard is from partners that there's a lot of desire for partners really are seeking more technical resources out of Metro so they can develop better applications to be competitive in that grant application process. There, in particular, we heard a number of smaller jurisdictions seeking support in that manner. So we've heard this loud and clear, and we are looking at what opportunities or options are available for that. We've also heard, there's a desire to also provide more opportunities, whether that's like through a pre-application process or possibly through a process once we've completed the technical evaluation to be able to provide applicants the opportunity to clarify responses and such in the Step 2 applications. So we're all going in aware and with a clear awareness of what the application is seeking to do and being able to communicate that out. We've also heard quite a bit about defining the Step 2 evaluation criteria. We know that as part of the Regional Transportation Plan update that was adopted at the end of 2023, that a new goal area was adopted centering around thriving economy. And so in trying to bring the Regional Flexible Fund allocation in alignment with the implementation of the Regional Transportation Plan, us defining criteria that will then be evaluation criteria that for the applications centering on thriving economy and clarifying what that evaluation criteria is will be really critical. There's also a little bit around resiliency that we're also looking into, and we've heard that back from regional partners about being supportive of around bringing that forward, since the regional transportation plan had refined some of its goal area around climate to incorporate resiliency. But really, again, being able to communicate what that evaluation criteria is well in advance, so then applicants have the opportunity to be able to respond to those to that criteria. Next slide, please. So the next steps, next slide, please. We continue to gather input on the program direction, and we have been making the rounds. We were most recently at TPAC the beginning of this month, and we continue to summarize that information that we are receiving, and we're looking to bring that information forward into formulating a set of program direction options, or like in a sense a menu of options. And we look to start presenting some of that information starting at the next TPAC presentation in April, as well as at JPAC. But again, there's still some open time for discussion around that. We'll be doing that as well in May. But just being able to start reflecting back the feedback that we've heard through what are some different ways that that could potentially look like in the development of the program direction for the flexible funds. Next slide, please. So with that, here is my contact information. Again, happy to take your input today. I'll be writing notes, and if there's any other clarifying questions we can give about the process and schedule, happy to do so.
Great, thank you, Grace. Questions for Grace? It's a quiet group today, geez. And I'm not seeing any hands up. You're going to get out of here, Grace, without a lot of questions today. Doesn't mean we might not, when you come back next time over I'm assuming you're going to come back in the next phases, or come back with the other subject you were prepared to present on.
Absolutely happy to do so. I'll coordinate through Jessica, and as your agenda allows, we'd be happy to bring you along and keep you updated.
Yeah, please, because I know the MTIP we were expecting, but you weren't. So if work out with Jessica, and we'll see maybe in the next 3 months or so. All right. Well, thank you for coming and sharing your information with us today. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So that brings us to item B, the 2024 legislative summary. Is Erin in the building? There she is. Hello, Erin.
Good afternoon, everyone. For those that don't know me, I'm Erin Doyle, use she, her pronouns. I'm the Senior Government Relations Manager for Washington County. And I am slowly transitioning out of paying attention to the state. So this might possibly be one of my last updates that you hear from me about a state legislative process. I will make sure that you all meet Carly in a future meeting before she is taking over my state role. I will still be playing in your sandbox from time to time as I am maintaining my portfolio for purposes of federal and regional work. But just wanted to give you that update before I did 10 minutes of 35 days of chaos, just to see if you all can keep up with me. Just kidding, of course you can. So as you know, this was a short session, which is short in name, but not in amount of work, I would say. 35 days by the requirements of the Constitution, limited number of bills that any one individual or committee or even leadership can bring to the table. That doesn't mean they don't do really big bills instead of doing small bills, and many of them they do a few bills with big topics. So this year, there were a couple of goals that were set out by the leadership for this legislative session. One was to have one completely through the entire 35 days, have everyone show up every day to get work done. And they accomplished that. Yay! They did that by really focusing on two primary issues. One is, of course, the reform of Measure 110 and how to continue to address the ongoing substance use disorder crisis that our state is facing, and how we can find more pathways to treatment for folks. I am not going to talk about that with you all today because that is not a land use or transportation or WCCC area of expertise. But you have resources if you need more information. The other big area that the legislature declared that it wanted to work on is addressing the ongoing homelessness crisis and housing writ large, because we can't move people into places that don't exist. So I'm going to focus a lot of what I have to say on the various housing packages that were brought forward, many of which have impacts on the works we do as local governments, and the fact that they might finally be hearing us when we say one of the major barriers to housing development is in fact infrastructure and paying for it, because as your conversation around MSTIP funding, everything's more expensive year to year to build. And so maybe we could take back some of that help from state and federal government in building those big infrastructure projects instead of trying to do that on restricted local taxes. I will continue to editorialize, you cannot stop. So the big bills in the housing world, there were 3 of them. House Bill 4063, Senate Bill 1537, and Senate Bill 1530, and I'll take them each in turn. House Bill 4063 was a legislative omnibus package that was mostly full of technical changes, but those technical changes do clarify some things in this region. But the other big thing that was included in it is one where there's a lot of relationship work that gets done between the cities and county related to the urban unincorporated areas. Included in House Bill 4063 is extending the expectations that were placed in on cities related to the ONA, whereby the state will take our housing needs analysis and divide up across the region how many units of housing we're expected to produce using our housing production strategies, and take that from a requirement that's placed on cities to cities and the counties within the metro region for our urban unincorporated areas. And of course, we all know that urban unincorporated areas are areas where we expect growth to happen. It's where people reside currently, and there has got to be a lot of coordination between the city and the county in how we plan and what expectations we set for those areas. By extending this work and this housing needs analysis and kind of here's our proportionality coming from the state, it is now incumbent on us to even more closely coordinate on how we handle those urban unincorporated areas and building housing production strategies that don't just meet the state's goals, but also work in coordination as those areas transition from county to city, hopefully someday, along the lines that we haven't planned for growth that you would be unable to take on if someone were to annex into a city. I use those very inflammatory words very carefully. There's no requirements related to that. It really just puts an onus on county to do more work, but we want to do our work in coordination and partnership with the cities, and that is still allowed to be done using our urban planning area agreements or other tools of IGAs where we can reach them. So that's new work. We will be set on the same schedule as the cities in the metro region, and all of that rulemaking is going to occur over the next year, and we will be put on the 6-year cycle, just like each of you currently are. That does lead into one of the more very technical issues, but wanted to clarify that it's in there in House Bill 4063. When they wrote House Bill 2001 last year, they were changing how the housing needs analysis language works within statute, because they were placing things in new buckets of responsibility within the metro region. So there is some clarification about cities, counties, metro, and the state, and essentially it retains the city's expectation that it does its own housing needs analysis as part of their work. It doesn't, so shifting that back, I think that was an accidental oversight, and then clarifying that there is still the housing needs analysis for the metro region that is done at the state level, and they divvy that back out, and then making sure that Metro's roles and responsibilities were also clarified so that they aren't taking on new things that no one expected them to be doing, including them and us as local jurisdictional partners. So there's a lot of clarification language in there. That's why this bill is very long. Other things that are very technical in nature, so I won't answer any questions about them, are related to the partition process when it comes to middle housing, clarifying some of that work that your planning counters will have to be doing and how they're approaching it. And then also There's a city option for creating single unit property tax exemptions, and it just did some clarification of that process for those of you who opt to do that on a one-off basis for residential units. So 4063 kind of is all over the place, but it's just really, I think the key there is how we, as for the portions of cities that are inside the metro region, will be coordinating with yourselves, with the county, and with Metro as we all institute this new process of the ONA, or the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, for the region. The other big omnibus bill was the one that was proffered by the governor and changed through the 35 days after being changed a bunch of times before the 35 days. There's a lot of different parts to this bill. I will get into some of them because those are the ones that are, you know, placing the ones that I can describe. No, these are the ones that are clearer and less technical in nature. But the big pieces of this is the creation of a new office at the state level called the Housing Accountability and Production Office, also known as the HAPO. According to me, it's building codes folks. You have Oregon Housing and Community Services are involved in this. This office is supposed to do a few things to help smooth out processes and find ways forward that aren't necessarily based in litigation, but can be, because we never take litigation off the table. Primarily, there's a lot of requirements to do a lot more technical assistance and sitting down with local governments that are working on their housing work to help developers develop, to help get us out of the overall shortage of housing. That technical assistance can come in many forms. But really looking at how to interpret what they call housing laws, which covers the land use component, it covers the and the building codes areas of the law. But in addition to that, the HAPO was given a little bit more weight on our work. They are allowed to investigate complaints against local governments for how we implement those housing laws. They can mediate disputes between a local government and a developer or applicant. And they can also refer our work to the appropriate state agency for purposes of telling us we've done it wrong and putting into place the oversight that DLCD or DCPS could place on us through their ability to, I'm going to just call it sanctions, even though they're not all the same. But they can't directly do anything. They have to refer it out. What can also happen is if there's an appeal at the Land Use Board of Appeals, also known as LUBA, they can make, they can't work like LUBA works. So if there's an ongoing appeal at LUBA, that is separate and apart from what the HAPO is going to be doing. So there is some clarity created there, and I think it's an improvement over what was originally, where we could be facing, sanctions, mediation, and litigation all at the same time. Felt a little much. So basically the HAPO steps out when these other agencies have stepped in. So that's a lot of new work for a brand new office that has to be built, stood up by DLCD in the meantime. But what was also made clear in the legislation is that HAPO is specifically directed to prioritize working with local governments that are voluntarily seeking assistance. So in their limited sets of resources, they are supposed to put those of us who come to them and ask for help first, as opposed to doing the mitigation or investigation. The final piece that is important as a body for folks to be paying attention to HAPO is they are also going to be tasked with making recommendations to various state agencies that provide grants related to housing development to help them understand what prioritizations do to housing development. So that's an area where our voice should really continuously be speaking out because we understand how grant programs function and what restrictions can be placed on us that make it actually more expensive to use those grant programs to build things like the infrastructure or other pieces of the housing components, updating codes, whatever it is. So those are the reasons to pay attention to the HAPO. The next section of the bill that I wanted to talk to you about is the fact that it now allows goalpost moving for applicants and in local processes. Often, historically, when someone applies to do development, their application is reviewed under the process that is in place at the time of their application. but we managed to walk and chew gum at the same time as local governments, in which we might be reviewing an application under the old rules while implementing new rules that could have an impact on that application. And this allows the applicant to say, hey, I want the new rules, not the old rules, without setting us so far back that we can't, or it shifts the time schedule to start over again at that point, at that selection to go under the new goalposts. And also allow for that public process that's necessary to meet the goal 1 obligations we have under the land use system. So that's a new thing, but it's at the applicant's discretion, not at ours. The next is related to the Land Use Board of Appeals. If there is a challenge to a local government's decision to allow for some housing to be developed for needed housing, it extends the ability to collect attorney's fees, which is really helpful for local governments defending our decisions to allow for development to move forward. And those attorney fees come out of the challengers, but it only works if we agreed to the housing. It doesn't work if we said no to housing. Just throwing that out there. There were some grant programs included in this omnibus bill for purposes of infrastructure development and creation of low-income housing. I'm not going to get into those details too much because they're more directed at the developers than they are local governments. There is a technical issue related to limited land use decisions which has an impact on how variances are granted and things and how they can be appealed. And then the big piece of this bill that I saved to the end because it's more fun that way is related to urban growth boundary expansions. This has been an ongoing conversation about how to make that process smoother, and through the course of the legislative session, this got needled and wheedled and reshaped a number of times. There is now an urban growth boundary process for cities inside Metro and cities outside Metro that allows for UGB expansion, but it's really restricted into which cities can take advantage of this opportunity if they want to basically those that haven't had a chance or haven't been able to complete an urban growth boundary expansion if in the last 20 years is primary candidates, but you also have to make a showing of lack of housing affordability within your region based on some metrics that are laid out in the law that are basically saying can people afford to live in the houses that do get built there, or is there just such an impact on housing costs, either rent burden or mortgage burden that's so significant enough that you qualify? The other thing is if you have expanded your urban growth boundary in the last 20 years, you can show that you've used or planned to use up to 75%, or you have to have either used up or have plans on the books to use up 75% of the land included in that expansion area before you can qualify to use this process. There are simple processes for really small expansions. There are for smaller cities. There's other processes that require coordination with the county and other service providers in the area. And then for the large cities, which none of the cities outside of Metro qualify as, there's additional requirements for those folks. Inside the Metro process, there is still a Metro process. And there is a limitation on the number of total acres that can come into the Metro region, which I believe is now set at 300 acres total across the Metro region. There are timeframes in which that UGB process can be used. So essentially, you have up until 2033. I can read my own notes, but Metro has to make its final decisions no later than January 1st, 2027. So those are some of the timeframes the qualifying is going to be the challenging part, I think, and then making the plans in place to rapidly develop or plan for development of those areas is going to be the second hurdle. So no big issues for cities there, right? That's again Aaron Doyle's commentary. So that was the really big piece of that package that was heavily negotiated right up until it finally came through about a week and a half before session ended. The final piece of that package was Senate Bill 1530. That's the money bill, quite literally, for housing. In summary, there's over $100 million for purposes of emergency shelters and eviction prevention, and affordable housing provided to OHCS. DAS is in addition required to spend about $100 million in infrastructure projects that are outlined in the bill. The Oregon Health Authority is given funding for recovery housing projects, as well as home repair and air conditioning deployment issues, which can help keep people in housing in a safe manner. Similarly, the Department of Energy has money for residential heat pumps. Again, that's about being able to stay in your house because you can afford your own utilities. And then the Department of Human Services was provided $2 million for emergency warming or cooling shelters to use throughout the year. So those are some pretty big investments in housing. They aren't direct to us, except for the $100 million that went to infrastructure projects as outlined in the bill. Moving off of housing and into some other smaller things, because someone told me I could take more than 10 minutes, so I'm gonna. Recreational immunity is another place where, in the transportation side of the world, we spend some of our resources to build trails. Those trails connect people to parks, those trails connect people to places, and there was a court case that most of you are probably familiar with at this point that would have said, no, recreational immunity only applies if you can prove that the person was intending to recreate on those trails, as opposed to just connecting to recreation, which seems like a really high bar and very unpleasant and pretty much impossible. That has never been the purpose of recreational immunity. The purpose of recreational immunity is to protect us from a lot of lawsuits when we haven't, ignored repairs that need to be used, so that we can keep things open to the public and free to access. And so there was a bill that has placed that use of trails of walking, biking, and any other means of transportation or of moving yourself on those trails back under recreational immunity. But it does have a sunset. So we'll be working over the interim as cities, counties, parks districts, special districts, the state, to work with the trial lawyers to see if we can't go back to making sure that we allow for access to these vital resources, where we've spent a lot of money at the state and local levels to make sure people can enjoy a recreation trail, even if that trail might connect to something else. Another bill that was out there that did not get funded was a burden shifting on system development charges if cities worked in coordination with or cities, counties, and other STC entities worked with the state to allow for someone to not pay their SDCs until 180 days after certificate of occupancy, that this would have provided for a state fund to backfill the local government, and then the state would be required to go after the builder for failure to pay, as opposed to, so basically taking the risk off of us. That bill didn't move forward. That was only set aside to have $10 million. Not really sure how much of security that would have bought us, but it was a step forward and at least a recognition that there is a risk that goes with delaying the payments of SDCs, and it's really hard for local governments to take that risk on. I think it also is reflective of the greater infrastructure payment conversation that is clearly starting to take place as a major component to the development of residential, the residential development. Finally, I'll just touch on, there was also some very brief conversations related to the transportation funding at the state level, particular to the weight mile tax. There is a requirement that light duty and heavy duty pay their fair share for impacts to the roads. I use fair share in quotes because I don't understand what fair share is, but there's a definition. And those heavy duty truck users have determined that the weight mile tax is actually disproportionately impacting them, and they are paying more than their fair share. So a number of bills to fix that problem were brought forward, but then someone sued. And now we don't deal with this in the legislature, we deal with this in litigation. But it also led to some conversations to preview what is expected in 2025, which is a robust transportation package that is, according to the legislature, going to be more focused on the operations and maintenance at ODOT and maintaining the revenue sources that we have, or maybe changing the revenue sources that we have so that we can keep up with the needs of the state, because the gas tax as written is not. So that was the other big conversation in the transportation world. And with that, I have talked a lot. I have talked fast, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for Aaron? Mayor Wenzel.
Thank you, Aaron, for the presentation. I have a question about urban growth boundary conversation. Was there any discussion about allowing cities to exchange our reserves? So specifically in Forest Grove, our urban growth reserves are on David Hill, which means the infrastructure. So it just like will never align because it's never going to be affordable to develop there. And so we're kind of stuck.
I did not hear much conversation about that type of swapping of urban, like there is the opportunity to swap the UGB, but not specific. There's nothing in there about reserves. So the land swap for the UGB though is across Metro. So similar to the process that just went through in this area where we took some of Metro's UGB from Clackamas County and placed that immediate development opportunity in Washington County. I did not hear anything specific to looking at redoing the reserves process. I think that that is a very big lift with this legislature, who some of them might remember the process that took place in 2014 related to Washington County's reserves. But no conversation is done when it comes to housing.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, Sharon? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up, but I know you're sticking around for the next subject, so we'll go ahead and move on to the next subject, which is the JPAC trip in May. And this is Aaron, Stephen, and Jessica.
Stephen, do you want to kick it off, or do you want me to talk most?
Yeah, I think I'll let you jump in. So the topic obviously is an ongoing discussion about potential priorities for the JPAC DC trip. And so Aaron, Jessica, and I have participated in some discussions with Metro and others about how to jointly develop some messaging that we can all sort of agree on in terms of regional priorities and how to frame those when we get back to DC. And this might also be a good opportunity just to confirm with Aaron if any changes, since people have sort of previously indicated they may or may not be going to DC. So this might be a good opportunity just to make sure we're all caught up as to who thinks they may or may not be on that trip. So with that, I'll maybe let Aaron or Jessica, if they want to run through a little bit of the latest discussion, I'd be happy to let you do that.
I'll go first because I can't help myself. We have had a pretty robust conversation about how to better align the presentation of why JPAC is there with the feedback we've heard, not just from you guys, but from the federal delegation around can't just be a list of projects. And so there is a proposal that is being kicked around is to kind of create a set of stories that highlight policy work that we would like to see done and emphasis where we'd like to see money go, and how investments in transportation have further impact to community. So that set of, we're calling them stories, and I struggle with that a little bit because we're not doing, like we're storytellers regardless of how we approach it, but really looking at 4 main themes for these stories. And one is the revitalization of local communities, expanding access to housing and promoting economic development by looking at urban arterials and transit and equity oriented investment. So that's a huge mouthful, but kind of using that to then lift up some projects that we've been able to accomplish without saying this is the project we're asking for funding for, but talking about how we're doing jurisdictional transfer, orphan highway redesign, the transit-oriented development that we've done. I think that's really highlights a lot of work that's been done in Washington County. The next one is investment in transit to improve access to reliable, affordable transportation and reduce transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions. Obviously, we've got a few projects there we could talk about that would be examples of how we're doing that, but wouldn't be the focus of the conversation. Then creating a safer transportation system without serious crashing, injuries, or fatalities. How we're investing in that and how we'd like to see the federal government invest further. And then modernization of transportation infrastructure for climate resilience, which is another key component of how we are looking at things like, those bridges that you were all discussing earlier. So those kinds of, we have some major bridges that have some resiliency issues. We're trying to find ways to pay for them. But also, just the extreme weather events that we have, flooding that can occur, ice storms that occur. It's really fun around here. So really taking, instead of being like, here's 17 projects we would like to see funded, really say, we know you've done a bunch of investment. These are the areas where we're seeing the most need and the most work that we've been able to get done. It's probably too soon to ask you to do this, but we'd like you to start thinking about the next transportation infrastructure financing package, because it's never too early to do 15 weeks of infrastructure week before anybody does any work at the federal level. So kind of kicking it off in that direction is kind of where I've been pushing us. Some people tell me that perhaps I should stop living in this idealized world where the federal government works efficiently across to develop things in a timely manner and in a cycle that we can all appreciate and invest in. But I won't, the little bit of optimism I have, I'm not losing it. So all of that is to say, it's really a reframing of how we present the work that we're doing in this region to really focus on how we are meeting the goals of the federal legislative process. And then, so that's day one with the legislature. I think we haven't really dug into what we're trying to accomplish with US DOT, but it's similar in nature, using these, 4 themes to tell the story and get connection to our projects, and thinking about us as not just one bridge that needs replacing, but a community that it works together, and presents a unified front for the major investments that we need, and how we can convince US DOT to give us all the money that they have. Without asking them to give us all the money that they have. So that's kind of day 2. And then day 3, as Stephen noted, as soon as I know who all is planning to attend, I've already asked our federal team to start setting up some meetings, and we can figure out what the purpose and intent of those meetings are. It can be more of the same discussion around transportation, or we could have a different type of conversation about what the needs are in the region, or not the region, within Washington County, the geography, not just Washington County, the entity, and have a robust conversation that is additive to the whole JPAC trip, but haven't set that specific agenda yet. Want to work with you all in creating that, as so everyone feels comfortable and feels the purpose of being out there and having those conversations in a separate set of meetings on Thursday. Jessica, what did I miss?
I think that was a great overview. I was wondering if we should share the 4 themes, or if we, I don't know, I guess you kind of went over them, but to see if any of you have any input on this approach, basically, versus a list of projects, because we heard really clearly or Stephen and Aaron heard very clearly last year that a list of projects didn't work well. It was too much. And so we think this whole approach with the thematic, we're working together, we're trying to get things done, and help us get more things done, basically, would work a lot better. So like Aaron said, we really need to know who is going to finalize their travel plans and join us. I think the last we heard, only a handful of you were planning to go. So maybe Mayor Bubenik or Chair Bubenik, we can go around the room and everyone can say whether they're attending or not and who's planning to attend. That might help us.
Right. I plan on attending, as does Mike McCarthy. Others. I know Callaway told me he's going. I don't know who's going with him, but I know he's going. I just saw Mayor Fitzgerald's hand up.
Thank you. I'm attending, as is our Transportation Director, Dwight Brashear, and Mark Ottenad, and head of our Government Relations.
Others. See head shaking. It's going to be Mayor Fitzgerald, myself, and Callaway. Looks like.
The one with our clear on was Mayor Rosner, but as he's not here, I guess we could follow up with him later.
I sent him a text, but he didn't respond.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think for the county, I know Commissioner Fye and I will be sitting in budget meetings that week. So Aaron and Jessica are both planning to go from the county.
Okay. Rick, do you know if anyone besides Callaway's going, or because usually you guys have a handful of people? You might be off away from the computer.
I don't know if anyone else from the city is going. I haven't been privy to that.
Yeah,
All right.
understanding.
All
I think Matt Delata from the city was planning to join Mayor Callaway.
Mayor from King City went last year. Is anybody gonna check in with King City folks?
Mike was saying he didn't think so. They just named a new mayor. So I don't know if she is going to attend or not.
Right.
Linda's going like this. What does that mean?
No
We
audio.
have two people. They can't even meet one-on-one without a quorum.
Yep.
Yeah, poor King City. I mean, I just don't even know. Oh, that's the bell. I gotta go. Bye, everyone.
But we can continue to reach out and find out who's going to go, so we can have a final list for Jessica, and then the story. I think, as mentioned, we heard loud and clear from Representative Blumenauer last year. Don't give me that list. Give me why it's important and why it's better than the other project. But I think the storytelling effective strategy versus just saying, "Give us $100 million, trust us, these are good." Push it over the finish line. Why this needs to be done here in Washington County or in the metro area versus the money going to Dayton, Ohio.
I agree. I remember that was a very clearly delivered message.
Yep. Okay. Stephen.
And I think this is his last year, so.
But I think he spoke for others too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think we probably heard a similar message from, I think it was Senator Merkley as well, kind of a similar take on things. So we do think that this is an opportunity both to, within the construct of a narrative and thematic approach, also to talk about specific examples of projects that either the federal government has helped with, and we want to thank them for, and or are opportunities where ongoing funding for some new programs will really help us to continue achieving good things. And so that, in a sense, is a way to talk about some project priorities, but really framed within that much larger narrative of the importance of some of these programs and continuing to, continuing the programs, maybe with some alterations or refinements. I think the sense is that the climate in DC is not great right now this year, certainly for a significant amount of headway on that, but it's never, as Aaron said, it's never too early to start talking now.
But they were all celebrating that they got the 24 budget finally approved and the community involvement projects done, and they're supposed to be starting on the 25 stuff now, and they're still working on 24.
Yeah, they're not quite done with the 24 budget. They still have till the end of the week to do 3/4 of the budget. It's fine. Everything's fine.
Yeah, they're in a severe time lag there. All right. Anything else on this one?
Well, I was just gonna close it out by saying that Aaron and I can follow up with everyone planning to attend so that we can go over these thematic messages in more detail.
Much appreciated.
All right. That brings us to item D, the JPAC agenda. Mayor Callaway is ill, so that Commissioner Fye, can you speak to the JPAC agenda? Or Rick, you want to cover it? Or I guess Commissioner Fye, you go first.
Rick, did you want to do it?
I don't have much information on the agenda.
Okay. Yes, I could quickly. It's a very light agenda, Chair and everyone. There is one consent agenda item, which is adding a new ODOT Carpin funded signal project grouping. And this is adding to the 2024-2027 MTIP. And it's about meeting about project delivery requirements. So this is an ODOT project. And that's it. There's not a lot of information included on the agenda, so I look forward to that if there is a staff briefing on that. And then the other on the agenda item on the agenda is informational and discussion agenda items. And this is the regional transportation priorities and funding. So this is again an ODOT presentation, and it's going to be specific to operations and maintenance funding. And the idea is to really talk about the funding mechanisms and then to prepare for project 2025 or legislative 2025, I should say. I think that's it, Stephen. We have not had a staff briefing yet ourselves, but the agenda seems very light. There's not much, very light. I think I do think I did have a question for you, Stephen. I was going to wait in our check-in to talk about it, but I think it might be beneficial to everyone. There was a presentation that was done in January around Funding 101, and then they're doing part 2 again. Is those conversations coming to WCCC? And the goal, I think my understanding is to have a really robust transportation package for 2025. So it's building up. So is WCCC going to be looped in on these presentations? I see you shaking your head. So
yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and we're certainly open to that feedback. I think obviously a focus, and Erin Doyle, if she's still on the call, can affirm this, but I think that's going to, as she was saying, be a focus of the transportation funding discussions at the state level in 25. Will really be focused on ensuring that ODOT is going to have ongoing operational funding. We want to, I think, be a supportive voice in that discussion. We're also, all of us at the local level also find ourselves in a similar position of needing to ensure that we're going to have sustainable funding streams through the revenues that we receive both from the state and ensuring that we have local option revenue mechanisms available to us or continue to have those available to us. So I do think that certainly those of you that are at the JPAC table, if you believe that would be valuable information to bring back and share here, we're happy to do that. And I know ODOT would be, I'll not to speak for Stephanie, but I'm pretty sure ODOT would love to come and tell us more.
I'm sure we would. I agree.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Fye. Councilor Mays, do you have anything from Tim about the impact agenda?
There is no published agenda on the website yet, so.
That's an easy one to answer. All right.
And I would note the impact meeting is during spring break week, and so I think there will be probably a number of alternates participating this time around as well.
Okay.
I.e. there probably won't be much on the agenda.
Yeah. All right, that brings us to number 5, other business and agency updates. Mayor Lube, anything from R1 Act?
Nothing super notable. We're sort of spending the next meeting kind of doing a legislative update again and having an opportunity to really plan out the rest of the year for more robust engagement.
All right. As far as RTAC, Commissioner Fye and I have been serving on the RTAC, and I know all of you have heard the governor has again paused. This is me saying pause tolling again. That the RMPP on I-5 and 205 is the discussion has stopped for a while, and ODOT's not supposed to spend any money on it anymore. There's still a question how the Abernathy Bridge would be paid for. So those discussions are ongoing. I had wearing my Clackamas County hat this morning. I was at a meeting where there's no clear answer on will ODOT release the environmental assessment in July and still continue possibly on items relating to 205. So there's a lot of questions still to be answered. And the conversation about funding of projects in the future, Stephen was saying that Representative McLean has now twice brought up since the governor's announcement about the 50 cents we get out of every dollar, that perhaps the county and cities will not get all of that, that the state will keep it, which is terrifying for most of us. So the Clackamas County folks have a meeting with Representative McLean next week to discuss these comments, and that will have impact obviously across the state if as part of the 2025 package from the legislature, they change the proportion of revenues sharing on the gas tax. So more to come there. Anything you have to add, Commissioner Fye? Because you were nothing? Because I don't know if you had any last minute meetings before the governor made her announcement.
You did a great job, Mayor,
Okay.
Chair.
Right.
I think you summarized it very well.
Yep. So going back to words of Ronald Reagan, Clackamas County is trust by verify right now, as far as waiting 2025 to see if tolling really is not going to resurface, you know, in a few years again, because we all know ODOT does need funding, but where's it going to come from for ongoing maintenance and support of our highways? Okay. Anything else today? We'll get done a little bit early. Not seeing any hands up, so do I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
Would adjourn.
Second.
Okay. I have a motion second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Have a great rest of your day, and thanks for attending today.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.